Welcome, everybody, to another edition of Stacked Labs. And I appreciate all of you hanging on. I am going to first off apologize. This is my issue here. We had a little bit of a technical snafu on the start, so thank you all for tuning in. We should be live on Periscope, on YouTube, and on Twitch, and everything being recorded today. So on your screen right now, you only see me, but I assure you, I got the two people you really do want to talk to in Bob and Alan coming up here in a moment. Obviously, Bob from Everest ID and Alan from Stacked, and Alan wrote that wonderful article on Everest and ID that you guys all saw this week that I retweeted that we talked about on the stream yesterday. So, hey, Tom, welcome in. Thanks for popping by. So this is my idea, and maybe it's a good one, maybe it's a bad one. We'll find out in a second here. I have a video from Everest, and I think this is going to set the stage because there's so much we're going to get into, and I think this is absolutely groundbreaking, something that we're all going to be talking about for a while. And this video is a video that Bob did with Ecdsa not too long ago. That talks about kind of what Everest is doing and what the impact can be. So I'm going to pull myself off the screen. I'm going to pull that back up. And let's take a look here.
Hi, I'm Bob Reid, CEO of Everest, and we digitize identities and transactions for all of humanity. The problem of legacy and siloed systems leaves many out of the formal economy. Everyone from crypto wallets who don't have identity or KYC, to the billions unbanked, or the 4+ billion who don't have smartphones. The solution is to combine biometric ID with cloud accounts, digital money, and transactions. Let me show you the basics.
Ayu, a mother of 3 in the village of Tangerang, doesn't have a bank account or a debit card. 99% of her economic life is spent with hard cash. It would take Ayu days to go to the local bank branch, have her identity verified with multiple sources of supporting documents. All time, hassle she doesn't have. And it's unprofitable for banks to put a branch or even an ATM in most places. But with the commoditization of biometrics, cloud technologies, and encryption, Everest's branchless, deviceless platform enables banks to profitably service Ayu and everyone else in the world.
So Ayu can onboard herself, or an agent can do it for her by entering some basic information, like name and address, collect whatever supporting document she might have, and her biometrics. We also gather consent and get the purpose of the account. And so in under 2 to 3 minutes, we can actually give Ayu an account up in the cloud where she doesn't need a device at all. Legacy banks can connect to the Everest platform through our gateway, where we create a biometric identity that forms the basis for a cloud account. All ins and outs of that account are managed through our transaction ledger. And we support e-money as well. Everest is a regulated financial institution in Europe and Australia, and we have 2 patents pending. We build accounts for users and businesses and do transactions in multi-currency, fiat, and crypto. All of that opens up services from onboarding to cross-border payments to peer-to-peer. We've been building on our vision for the last few years with some of the largest institutions in the world, from banks in South Asia to governments to more recently doing eKYC for the Ethereum Foundation. So, by integrating the Visa Direct API into the Everest Gateway, legacy banks can easily offer money transfer capabilities. And native to the Everest platform is peer-to-peer support. Banks can also push money to users' biometric cloud wallets. So in this case, Ayu is able to receive money without any device at all and exchange it with a vendor or merchant in the village. And in this case, Ayu was able to get a cooking oil canister where she was able to cook for her family. With every bank we digitize, Everest establishes an account of its own. And leveraging our e-money capabilities, we've built a seamless money transfer network, a swift killer, if you will. Now, Everest digitizes multiple verticals, placing all users into a common identity registry. And all users, once onboarded, are offered banking services, thus bringing more users into the Visa Direct ecosystem. So with biometric ID, cloud wallets, and digital transactions, we can bring IU and the rest of the world into the 21st century quickly and profitably. Thank you.
Wow. I've watched that video a lot of times in the past week or so, 3-4 days, and it gives me chills every single time. Digitizing the world and the technology there, absolutely crazy. Obviously, on our screen, we have the people you guys all came here to talk to. Below me, I guess to your left, if you're on the screen, you would see Alan from Stacked. Alan, welcome.
Hello, hello.
There he is. And then the guest of the hour here, Bob from Everest. Bob, thank you for joining.
Thanks for having me.
Alrighty. So we made it. Watched the video. I know you said that was from last year, right? So not that too far ago.
Yeah, it was June of last year, if I remember the video correctly.
June of last year. And yeah, it gives me chills. That's one of the things that I love about this space, that there are things happening that still give me chills when I hear and read about them and what they can make on a world stage. So when Alan and I talked about this and you coming on, I was like, oh yes, please. Because I've heard about Everest and ID for a long time, and I'm so excited to jump into this. I'm going to be a passenger on this train. Alan wrote an article, and I know you guys are going to kind of jump into a discussion here where I'm going to be a passenger and maybe ask the not as smart guy questions. That's my role as foil here. But Alan, why don't you kind of set us up a little bit?
Yeah, sure thing. So thanks again, Bob, for joining us. I was really excited that we're able to do this because I wrote the article without talking to you or anybody at Everest. And so I didn't know what I didn't know. And so the research was just sort of like my own and sort of picking out the areas that I thought were important. But happy to kind of like talk through some of those and maybe find out from you what I missed, because I'm sure there's probably something out there, that I didn't cover. But if you didn't see the article, the thesis was this. I just have this belief that, first, that crypto runs in cycles, and we're in a boom cycle. So inevitably, if you believe that, there's some end to this cycle coming. And so I start thinking about, as somebody involved in the space, both like from an individual interest, right? I own crypto, I'm involved in the space, but also from a business interest and running Stacked. The overall health of the industry does impact businesses just as much as it impacts individuals. And so I was spending some of my time thinking, all right, what are the risks? What sorts of things could trigger the end of the next cycle, the end of the current cycle that we're in? And my mind comes back to again and again regulation, because I think it's something that is not priced in. You can argue that halvings are priced in or they're not, that Ethereum protocol changes are priced in or they're not. And I think there's fair arguments on both sides for both of those. I think something that I would argue is absolutely not priced in by almost anybody is what regulators can do. And so like if you paid attention to my Twitter the last, week or two, it's just been my stream of thoughts on how this ends and how bad it can get. And I keep seeing in the replies, specifically because I talk about decentralized finance, or DeFi as most people know it. And so I also saw some people are telling me that I'm not supposed to call it DeFi anymore. I'm supposed to call it DAO. So I don't know. I'm not on that. I'm not on that train yet, but that space in general, most people know what I mean when I say that. The argument is, well, you can't shut it down. What are you going to do? And my gut reaction to that is like, well, just you wait and see. I don't know. I can't tell you exactly how it would be harmed, but I just think that the long arm of the government, whether it's the United States government or any government in the United Kingdom, is stronger than I think most people are giving it credit for, and it can be destructive to the industry. So with that frame of mind, I was like, who is working on some sort of digital identity that would allow people to operate either completely compliantly or as compliantly as possible, either with these protocols or with this space? Because in my mind, my bet is that someone is going to have to do it. It will either be the protocols themselves, or what I think is more likely, the protocols will focus on what they're best at, which is protocoling, and that could be decentralized lending, that could be payment processing, etc. And they will rely on someone else to figure out the identity component for them. Exchanges do it with KYC systems. Majority of exchanges are not building from the ground up a KYC system. They're bringing in a third party who does nothing but KYC really well and saying, hey, we're going to pay you $6 a user, $8 a user, $10 a user. You're going to handle that for us, and we're going to focus on our core competency. And so I started looking around the space, and I thought what you were doing was interesting. The frame of reference for my article was how Everest could plug into and be assisting DeFi protocols in being compliant. But would love to hear maybe like your take on just all of that. What did I get right? What did I get wrong? And where should we take it next?
First, I think your article actually was spot on with where the market's going. There will be, if you will, cycles to it. Your highlight of regulation, of how that's tied to identity, and then ultimately, if we come out of the next cycle in a, what I would say, second boom, how that reaches emerging markets, right? And so what we've seen, I'll give you a sense, this started 3 years ago, actually on the whiteboard even more, with the idea that identity is just fundamental for economies. Like literally, like, are you who you say you are? And if you can prove that, then you can start actually doing complicated, complex economies, right? And that's literally everything from, like, I put it, like Africa didn't have biometric identity. You could get loans and then like walk 30 miles in one direction, have a new identity and get another loan. And then when they did biometric identity, they're like, oh, great, deduplication. And all of a sudden, loans started getting, if you will, efficient.
There you go.
And so, just to frame it in context of, we're seeing the blockchain and crypto environments right now as literally somewhat anonymous, which means you can't actually do terribly complicated, complex economies built on top of that. That is, if your lingua franca is a wallet address with no identity attached to it, there's only so much you can do, right? So I did this at a conference when I was like, take your phone and your wallet, put it under your chair, and then get on a bus somewhere and go 50 miles in some direction, and then try to borrow $1,000. Right? Like just try that, or whatever the amount is, distance or money, but like to frame it, it's like, okay, well, sort of been proven time and time and time again. If you want to do economic development, like you got to start at the base, that's identity. And then as you work your way up, we end up at regulation. Like, okay, like, can we do something where you're just doing what Everest did, was like, we want to be able to allow users to own their identity. That is, they literally own like their own data store, my biometrics with my proof of address and my address itself, but maybe just the proof is all I need to share. So then we build that construct where the user actually owns the keys. And then they can share little bits of themselves depending on the social contract. Right? So it's like, so I put it like, you want to get on a dating site, like, okay, you don't need to know anything more than I have a Facebook account. If you want to transfer value like in Europe and it's under $70, great. No KYC, no identity information needed. It's like cash. You want to start doing more amounts or higher velocity, then all of a sudden, right, there are laws in place and you can go like, I'll share this little bit with me, you, prove an identity, right? Here's the proof itself, right? But you don't get to look at everything else, like my bank balance and everything else about my identity. So anyway.
A question for you there on the identity piece, because it's not something that I got into. I don't have a ton of experience. So would love just like a layman's explanation. In that piece where you're talking about sharing specific parts of the identity that are important or are not important, two-part question. One, who decides what pieces of information are important? Is that the requester? And does the person who is sharing that say yes to this but no to that? And the second part is, how is that all stored securely? I think we see
Yeah.
so many cases of, private information being leaked or stolen. What makes it secure with you?
So let me do that in reverse order. So
Okay, sure.
in terms of question number 2 first. If we have 1 million users, we literally have infrastructure that gives excuse me, each user their individual data store, right? So think of it like 1 million mini databases. It's a data store, right? The thing that will unlock that data store is literally live biometrics and a PIN, stuff that like not even Everest has control over, right?
Okay.
That will then, if you open up, think of it like a private Dropbox in a way, and you can get to different, in that case, layers of the onion. You can get to like, okay, well, that opens up the account. So I put it, it's like, here's my ERC20 wallet. And I also have a bunch of storage of like my proof of address, my other elements. And you can open up different elements of your identity, depending on, if you will, the thresholds. So that's how we constructed it. So, if you will, Ecdsa encryption, then distribution of the actual data stores itself. So like I said, there's 1 million data stores, not one honeypot of a database. And the only ones that are actually able to open it are the users themselves. So we look pretty darn secure. By the way, we've done multiple pen tests and most of the way through SOC 2 also. So like on a systemic level, it's pretty darn secure.
Understood.
Now,
the first part of that is, who decides what is pertinent information, and what can be done to prevent bad actors from requesting too much information from somebody that may not understand what they need to give and what they don't need to give.
So the requirements actually come down in law.
Okay.
Right? It's literally like, hey, guess what? And it's actually a good point. We should talk about FATF's most recent guidelines, but like, let's put it like, the European Union has said, here's what Mld5 requirements are. This threshold means you got to give this much information. In the US, it's FinCEN, et cetera. All, if you'll off-track in Australia, if you're doing cross-border, they basically go like, if you're doing this much transaction for this amount or this velocity, you have to start doing more information inquiry. So I'll give you an example. In the US, they require a tax ID number. It's like a social security number.
Yep.
They don't do that in Europe, right? In Europe, Mld5 will say like, hey, above a certain threshold, and by the way, it's really low, like a couple $100, you are now tracking that transaction. Okay, it's a requirement by all literally regulated intermediaries. So it gets into now, if you think about that, regulated intermediaries are typically banks or payment processors, or like us, we're a virtual financial asset licensed entity. Who those are all responsible for implementing these laws correctly.
Okay.
Right? Now, FATF's recent guidelines are saying, hey, there are these protocols out there, DeFi, and they can actually like effectively get yield, and that's great and wonderful. Like it opens up the whole market for everybody. And honestly, I'm a huge fan. It's democratizing finance. It's
Absolutely
awesome. And so what FATF is trying to do is they're trying to figure out how do we regulate somebody along the way from fiat on or off, or who's the intermediary that actually needs to fall under some sort of regulation to enforce the rules. And look, it seems like they've been pretty broad about that right now, in my estimation, most people's estimation. But make no mistake, to your point, like it's going to be regulated.
Mm-hmm.
They're not going to let this, if you will, go unregulated completely. Just looking at case studies of like Bitcoin, no stop in Bitcoin ever, and God bless it. Like that's awesome. So what they do, they literally said, okay, if you're a fiat on and off ramp, if you're an exchange, if you're doing anything like that, we will regulate that and make sure that whatever you do has to stay in the crypto sphere and never touch the real, what they would call the real economy.
Got it. One question that I saw pop up in the chat as you were kind of talking through where all of that data is hosted, you touched on biometric data, which I think
Hmm.
maybe more than anything else is probably something that people want to hold closely sort of to their chest. Um, how is that stored? Is that stored in those separate, I believe you called them databases? And
Data.
how is that secured?
Locker, yeah.
Yeah. So here's the interesting piece. It's actually the first time ever a user gets to own their own biometrics,
Hmm.
right? Like they're like Everest can't get into this data store. Only the user can. And so where it's hosted is actually determined by law again. So in Europe, and we're a European company, GDPR dictates you must have it distributed, and we do distributed inside the EU. When we were in Indonesia, law was, hey, you can have it distributed, but it's inside our borders. Same with Samoa, etc.
Okay.
Um,
And is that different for every individual country that you hope to, do business and interact with? Um, I assume the answer to that is yes. Everyone's got a different set of rules, or is there sort of some general guidelines that most countries adhere to?
Almost all countries that we deal with like to have the identity data stored within their borders.
Okay.
Okay. Um, Now, the thing to sort of juxtapose back, which is everyone gets a little freaked out when you say biometric identity. It's like Facebook, Google, Department of Homeland Security, California driver's license, et cetera, et cetera. Like that's out there. Those are
Yeah.
in probably dozens of databases where if a centralized database control mechanism wants to find you or have your database and use it, they can.
Yep.
Okay. Like I said, this is the way if you want real sovereignty, and sovereignty has a meaning, right? Like ultimate authority.
Mm-hmm.
We made it so that the user actually has that authority.
Just
Interesting.
to interject really quick here, Alan, because what you just said, Bob, is essentially my feeling towards all of this, which is it's not like this information doesn't exist.
Right.
It does, and so I know people get nervous about the sort of information being out there, and how does Everest secure it or whatever it is, which is a logical concern.
Yeah.
But my brain always goes to this stuff. It's not like this is the first time this has been out there. So what are we talking about here, right?
Yeah. The other thing to keep in mind is, if you will, we're all, if you will, Western, dealing in the U.S.,
Yeah.
Europe, etc., and we value our privacy.
Mm-hmm.
GSMA has done a great study where if you show up and do biometric identity in a lot of the emerging and frontier markets, they're not concerned with privacy as much. They're looking at this going like, wow, you're going to give me a platform where I get to prove I am who I say I am.
Yeah.
Like you're giving them freedom.
Can we go to that point? So to preface, segueing into this, my explanation to most friends and family about why crypto is important, I generally start with, and maybe I'm wrong here, but I just think it's what ends up making sense, is that people in the United States or the UK or just developed nations are probably the last people to quote unquote need crypto. Or to understand like so quickly why it's important. And so like I'll ask people to step out of the experience that they've had in the banking system in the US or the relatively stable currency in the US. Jared and I have talked about this in previous shows. As much as you want to hate on the system of the dollar, it's relatively stable and it works completely well for a large number of people.
Right.
And you can make arguments against it, but let's not do that for now. So I go back to the way that I explain crypto or the value of crypto to friends and family is like, well, how about these underdeveloped countries where they see their life savings wiped out in events that are completely outside of their control. Maybe it's a internal country conflict, civil war type situation. Maybe
Mm-hmm.
it's multi-country conflict, like we just saw in the news, Israel and
Palestine, yeah.
Palestine. Thank you. Or maybe it's simply just zero infrastructure and there's a bad actors that have the ability to control currency with really no oversight. So why and where does Everest fit into that? I was doing some of the research into the work, the partnerships that you have with nation states or national governments. How did that come about? Was that always sort of your vision for where Everest was going to be beneficial?
Sure. Ooh, that's a multi-layered question.
Isn't
Yeah, I
it?
tend to do
Isn't
that.
it?
I'll ask
Holy
6
smokes.
questions at once.
Let's start with it. I would
Good
start
luck,
with-
Bob. Let's go.
Everyone throws out the like, let's go bank the unbanked, right? And that's
Mhm.
kind of what we're talking about here. And when you start peeling that away, you go like, okay, well, you have to do identity verification, right? So we had to start there, right?
Mhm.
Like, okay, are you who you say you are? And then we had to get into like, okay, how do you actually get fiat money in? So, okay, we went out and got our MFSA license, which, by the way, not everyone believes me, but here it is framed on my wall.
Oh,
There you go.
very nice.
Thank you very much.
The next ask is going to be for a scanned photocopy to be uploaded and micro inspected. So be prepared for that.
I'm fully prepared for that. But I mean, like, I mentioned it. What that does that's unique is we architected our stable coin that's actually attached to that license so that we could take money in, so fiat in and out in countries all over the world. And we don't need additional licenses to do that, right? We don't have to get a new one in Indonesia or Colombia
Nice.
or Philippines, etc. Right? So that means, so like going up the stack, you got to go like, okay, are you who you say you are? Can I do a KYC check effectively? Can I then do fiat in? Then, wherever is sort of, I would call it the Shazam moment, we were like, well, blockchain and crypto with biometrics is, I call it like an Uber moment. Like when you could put GPS in 95% of the phones in the world, you have a new market.
No doubt.
And so we looked at this and went, wait a second, like we can do Ecdsa encrypted wallets for a penny with biometric identity. So really deduplication. Like we didn't like biometrics, just the key is you need deduplication. Am I really this piece of carbon? Sure. And you can get that with really high fidelity now because of the smartphones. So you're like, okay, it takes you a penny to make an account, ERC20 wallet. Any smartphone in the world, darn near, can create biometrics that are good enough, high fidelity enough to be deduplication. And then you need, if you will, crypto digital money that's programmable, which is again, this license. So now all of a sudden you're going like, okay, I can do onboard, get him in. Now I've got the account. And now we're doing the loops. We laid on our next, which is our Everchain, to L2 ledger to Ethereum. So that whole stack is something you literally have to build from the bottom up. Now, this gets into your question about nation states. I'll juxtapose it with, if you don't build it from the bottom up, that is starting with the identity layer, then to the wallet, then to the transactions, you just show them, you're like, I want to do a transaction network. Well, that was Libra trying to do that a year and a half ago, and they forgot about doing the identity layer first. And it just like all the regulators, by the way, like 6th largest company in the planet got, you want to know the power of a regulator and regulating governments around the world? Look at what they did there. They sent them home with their tail between their legs and literally go back and go do your homework.
Right.
Okay. So roundabout way of saying, since we started there and look, we showed up with this solution that's technically sophisticated and unique enough that basically looks like what I call e-Estonia or India's Aadhaar plus India stack. You show up into what I call G100 to 200. We're one of the few in the world that actually can do all of this.
Right.
Right. So then look, we do have lots of connections into nation states through our advisory board and some of the connections I've made over the years. And we're actually now getting some interesting traction with nation states that want to go like, hey, even if it's, I want a real-time gross payment system.
Right.
okay, like we can do that with the platform I just said, which is like everybody gets wallets, you have digital dollars, euros, pesos, whatever, and transact across that ledger that's really fast. Like that's a real-time payment system.
Mm-hmm.
Now, if I could simplify one part of that question, where I know I went off in many different ways, when the idea or the thesis behind Everest sort of came to you and you decided this is something you want to work on, was underdeveloped countries in your mind from the beginning, or did you say no, like
Good
I'm
question.
really interested in digital identity and here's a use case for it?
It was the former, like
Okay.
if you will. I used to before the pandemic, gosh, over half my time on airplanes in literally Philippines, Colombia, Indonesia, and a lot of where I came to just as a human being was the genetic lottery of it all, the what I would call injustice of simply to
Yep.
your point, like, wait a second, somebody just devalued my currency. I now have 1/3 in my bank account. You're like, and I'm looking at these things coming together of biometrics, blockchain, and crypto, going like, I'm pretty sure if we solve this, and we can, and Everest is, that changes everything.
Right.
And it changes everything. Like there's trillions of dollars being left on the table right now in the emerging markets.
Right.
Well, and even when you take the financial incentive out of it, from a business perspective or from a country's perspective and like their advancement, it's people's lives. Like I think like that's what we miss, and it's easy to miss when you like are separated from any sort of experience with that. If you're living in a developed world, you've never felt what currency debasement looks like over the course of like a night or a week. You know what I mean? So
Yeah.
it's interesting. A question that I have for you is, in those nation states that you're working with, I think I covered the Philippines as the example, or Indonesia. I can't remember now. I have to go back and look. But in those spaces, you talked about not needing a smartphone or a device to use your biometrics. So my understanding of it when I looked into it was basically you can send people out into the field almost as like a representative, and you probably have a better word for it, but that person can be armed with a smartphone, provided a smartphone, and they have an incentive to go out and collect basically users in the network. And I thought that that was so interesting because you hear, or I've heard of crypto projects, it's a noble mission to want to go out and provide access to financial markets to underserved communities or nations. But I think typically where they fall short is like, who's driving the adoption?
Right.
Because they're not on Google looking for the hottest coin, right?
Yeah.
And so it's like, how do you get in front of them and say, this is something where I can help you? It seems like you guys have a good plan to be able to do that with these representatives. Once they take the smartphone out there and they collect, they set up the user account, they collect the biometrics. Let's say that person that they collect does not have access to a smartphone. How do they then go to the bank or the financial institution where they originate that loan and say, I am who I said I am? Is that a scanner with those institutions?
Yeah. So literally any, to your point, like we call them agents. Agents can register users, and it's literally like, hey, scan to create the account. Now,
How do you incentivize them?
we
Do they
have
work for you?
we literally set up and allocated 100 million token ecosystem development fund to literally give commissions to agents all over the world.
Sure.
By the way, it's literally in Amsterdam to go sign up everyone who speaks Bahasa, for example, or in San Diego for the larger Filipino community, right? And so we're going to be connecting industrialized markets with emerging markets. And think of it almost like remittance agents around the world, right? They've got their little plaque out with like Western Union, MoneyGram, et cetera, et cetera. Well, we do that service cheaper and faster than them, but we also offer USD accounts, access to all of DeFi, buy and sell crypto, and even tokenized stocks is coming later this year. And so you go to one of these agents and go like, okay, you make $6 per year per user on what you're doing today. how about you make 35?
Yeah.
Right? Because you offer more services, it's cheaper and faster. You're like, okay. And that 35 is coming out of this ecosystem development fund.
Got it. So that makes sense to me in terms of how they're incentivized. So if we could go back to that representative or agent, you called it, goes out into the field, collects the biometric information. It's stored in the network, if that's the right way to phrase it. Now, how does that person interact and use that digital identity?
So they can go up to any, if you will, agent or kiosk that has just literally our app. And we did this in Indonesia. Like we had BRI Bank, which is the biggest bank in Indonesia. They were out in the villages going like, scan. Okay, now you put in your PIN. Okay, there's your account balance. Transfer some to me, and I'll give you some goods. And so this is like a walking point of sale.
Okay.
That's how the users were showing up just with their shirt on their back. So there does need to be, if you will, some interaction, but it can be a kiosk. Like we've done some kiosks like in stores, things like
Interesting.
that.
When that occurs, don't mean to put you on the spot here, but like where my operator mindset goes to is if I'm interested in the network, I would love to see almost like a real-time feed of users being signed up, the location of that user, and then, well, and I guess, now you start to get into privacy concerns, but some like measure that like, oh, this is working, right? Look at all the people that got signed up today and look how many transactions happened as a result of it. Is there anything that you guys offer to a user who's interested in the project, interested in what you have to offer, to sort of track your success, maybe like on chain?
It's interesting. We're actually like, I would say we've done it historically in Indonesia. And so now, and that was literally like for BRI Bank and then the government Ministry of Energy actually. And we're re-instrumenting this for 2-layer agents. So they're going to be a master agent, let's say in Manila. Then they're going to have their agents out in the field for, let's say, Cebu, Mindanao, etc.
Mm-hmm.
That'll be another layer. And then they're going to have, if you will, their guys down into the village level. And so what we're doing right now is we're instrumenting it so that you can actually do that tracking. So our guys, if you want to go like into the transaction, we can go like, oh, that guy signed up him, and then he signed up her, and she signed up that person, but it's not automated yet.
Got it.
If that makes sense.
No, it does make sense. Okay, so once that user is signed up and has their account, let's say they don't have access via a smartphone of their own, it's almost like crowdsourcing, right? So like if you're transacting at the market or transacting at the bank, the thought is that they'll have that infrastructure to be able to facilitate it. And the agents will then have some sort of like either real time or some sort of like activity monitor where they'll see their rewards being paid out to them based on the activity of the user.
Yeah. So if I were an agent and I signed up 100 people, and those 100 people go out and some of them are doing remittances, some of them are doing payments, some of them are doing DeFi, getting 8% yield, et cetera, et cetera. Those 100 people will generate earnings. And those earnings then flow into, oh, great, if you will, it's network marketing. And then I, as an agent, would receive my commission literally just flow into my wallet.
Yep, and that wallet can hold any ERC20 asset.
Correct.
Okay, got it. And this is somewhere, or where I'd like to take it, is somewhere I think Jared can be really useful, beneficial, his thoughts on this. So if we could talk about the tokenomics, because I understand sort of the use case. You described the development fund, if that was the right word for it, basically an incentive system. So in the tokenomics, those are being distributed to agents. Are they being also then distributed to the users who sign up? So the agent that goes out into the market and says, all right, hey, I'm going to grab your biometrics, is there an incentive for that user other than I now have a provable identity?
Every user is getting currently an ID token. Like that is literally like the functional, like it is a utility token. And so it has functional access think of it like a software license of access to Everest.
Nice.
Okay.
Yeah.
Now, over time, we're going to have to if you will make that a decimal point or two, right? There's almost 8 billion people in the world. And so not everyone will get one going forward.
Sure.
Got it. So in that case where the agent, or I guess the final end user is getting one, the agent's getting something. Now, okay, so that explains to me where the supply is going out into the market. What other tokenomics are built into the token?
Well, think of agent as almost channel, and channel can be literally, it can be a government, like we were talking about, like governments can do this. What we found over the years is actually the best customers who will stake the most are actually probably financial institutions, right? They have a profit incentive. And so I'll give you a sense of I'll air quote agent. What if you're a payment company, a brokerage, or a bank in, given geography, you go, I want to bring on 100,000 users, right? I want to KYC them, give them virtual accounts, and enable really intricate reporting. Okay, well, that's a bunch of functionality on the network that requires staking that is like a couple 100,000 ID tokens. So they'll stake that like a software license to gain the access with the functionality over time. Mm-hmm. Okay, so does that make sense?
Yeah, I think it does. So where, if you want to break it down into where's buy pressure, where's sell pressure is potentially on the end user, right? Because they receive something for signing up. They may be like, what is ID? I have no interest in ID. I could sell that. Not saying that they would do that, but it's possible. Where the interest in the supply of the token could be financial institutions saying we have 100,000 users that we want to roll this out to. They then need to acquire those or that number of ID tokens because that's access to the network, and they stake those. Did I get all that so far?
Yes, you did. The functionality, I think you've nailed. Yes.
Perfect. So now those financial institutions, maybe a relevant example, maybe not, you can tell me, is like you saw maybe something similar with XRP and Ripple. And what I mean by that is they were using the token to transmit internationally. So when a like MoneyGram or some business was interested in using that token, some bank, I think it was the largest use case of using that token. Oftentimes they were either being given the token by by Ripple in this case, or they were buying it from Ripple, and Ripple was reporting or not reporting those. How is that similar or different from you all? So if a bank comes and says, or a government is interested in saying, hey, we want to roll out 100,000 users, are they transacting with you or are they transacting with the market?
They can do both.
Okay.
Right? So I'll give you a sense. Like if you're Goldman Sachs of XYZ emerging market, odds are you're going to be buying on the market, right?
Right.
If you're the Red Cross and you literally want to do something special and unique, we would probably do a sweetheart deal with somebody like that.
Sure.
And we do directly. If that makes sense.
Yeah, to give them incentive to be on the network, to use you rather than anyone else.
Right. Yeah.
Got it. Jared, this is your realm, right? Because you're the token guy. What questions do you have sort of around tokenomics, usability, anything?
I mean, you essentially hit it because I'm just thinking long term. I've known about ID for a while, so a little bit of background on me, Bob. The FA I get from a macro level. It's like the crypto stuff's kind of hard for me. I'm a classically trained technical analyst, I guess, if you will. So started in stocks, futures, etc., and I moved into crypto, and I just love this whole thing. So I've known about ID for a while. Actually, I've never traded it, so I don't know if that's a good thing or a bad thing, but I've always believed in it. And here's the thing. I know a lot of people who love this and love what you're doing and are going, there's no way that based on Bob's vision that this doesn't eventually become something huge. So learning about the tokenomics of that and how you can help onboard people, I it's hard for me to ask questions, Alan, which is what I usually do on a short term, because this does not feel like a short term conversation. And so it's a onboarding new nation states. You talked about a little bit, the Red Cross and helping to indoctrinate and bring on new people in different areas where needed. Like that gets me excited about it, and it develops use case. So my question isn't necessarily around the tokenomics, but going towards a few of the things that you talked about earlier, and that's onboarding new people. Because my brain, I go as simple as possible. I try to take a step back and go, if I were in that situation and this position, if I was either in a government saying, do I really want to cede some of my control to somebody else? Because there's people that are very greedy in a government, maybe don't want to cede control, even if it is at the expense of their citizenry, right? Or from somebody else who doesn't know anything about this. That's a tougher sell. You're essentially painting a paradigm with this. That's a completely different shift. And you talked about agents doing that, but that's not easy. So that's kind of where my brain goes. You want to talk about that a little bit?
Sure. I've actually almost cut to the chase on this with a couple of people usually banks, by the way.
Sure.
Do you want to be on the side of the argument where your user doesn't have sovereignty and control?
Yeah.
Like, is that seriously where you want to be? like, it's cheaper, faster, better to do financial access and transaction with KYC and virtual accounts, etc. So it's a good product in and of itself.
Sure.
And by the way, the users will like it because they can go do 5 other things with the identity and wallet you just gave them.
Right.
And so I can tell you, like, that's a very quick, if you will, filter for us.
Sure.
And we found guys, and by the way, I'm talking like top 5 financial institutions on the planet, looked at what we did. And I was like, well, if you onboard them, I also want to allow them to get to DeFi. Are you good with that? And they were like, absolutely, because I'll give you a sense. It was an insurance company.
Sure.
Sitting there going like, guess what? Our users only check it once a month, once a quarter. If you have something else that's actually a little stickier, where it's doing more, they're going to come back to my Powered by Everest app.
Interesting.
Right? And, oh, by the way, they might look like a little bit like an agent, where they're actually now all of a sudden going to get paid a little bit.
No doubt.
So don't get me wrong. Like, we've seen a few governments and a few financial institutions, as I call it, anchored in the early 20th century, that it's all theirs and they must hoard it. We don't really work with folks like that.
Yeah. So at that point, it's just, all right, your citizenry will either put pressure on you to change your ways, or eventually that's just not somebody that we can work with, right?
Yeah. And like I mentioned, like, what we're finding is the financial institutions actually have the same incentive or set of incentives that Everest does. They're simply better, faster in terms of art. And again, like, these are just channels for us. Government, bank, hospital, school, NGO, like, they're just channels. As soon as a user's on and they have an identity in a wallet,
then
they're free. Then they can do whatever they want. And they're not, they don't belong to that government. They don't belong to that hospital. They don't belong to that bank. Like,
I love that. And Bob, there's a question I want to go back to. There's been actually a decent amount of chat questions that are going to be, you guys are on a roll, so I didn't want to pop in. But one of the questions that was just brought up is something that I feel like has to be discussed, given the light of the recent election in America, no less. But the question was, this could be potentially used for voting, right? Was something that came up in the chat. So are you trying to stay away from that? Like, what?
No, we've gone down that rabbit hole, and even written up quite an extensive way to do it with burnable tokens and implementing quadratic voting, as Vitalik affectionately calls it. Right? Here's your 10 tokens. You can allocate them and put 7 towards this and 2 towards that, and 1 I'm going to delegate out to somebody else.
Sure.
So yeah, we can do it. What we found, though, is everyone likes to talk about it. There's not a whole lot of people that actually, like, you got to show up with a lead customer, if you will, that actually want to implement it and, pay for the development, the customization of it. Right.
And Rodicius in the chat just said, implying governments want a voting system they can't manipulate. Yeah, I think there's a lot of cynicism out there, Rodicius in the chat, who probably, people feel the same way. I'm not saying you're wrong. I don't think it's necessarily true in developed nations, but it's certainly true in under or undeveloped nations. Like, that's a real concern. And like you said, it's just kind of like a snowball effect, I think. You got to get there one way or another.
Yeah, we'll get there.
one of the questions I saw in the chat or talk in the chat was, and something I don't know, I've noticed over the last 48 hours was sort of the enamoration with airdrops in crypto. They were super popular. I feel like they went away for a while, but maybe I just stopped paying attention to them. And then I've seen recently, especially on Solana, I feel like every new project is doing some airdrop. And tied to it is always like a retweet, a like, sign up this form, and it's like, and some of them end up being really valuable. Like not the ones I pick, obviously, but someone out there finds like these airdrops end up being worth $3,000, and like Uni is like a perfect example of that. Like real value was airdrops.
No question.
So there's value there. Is there, or do you see a play for digital identity in these airdrops? Is that a space that you're interested in? If not, fine. But right, nothing prevents me from creating 10 fake emails, 10 fake Twitters, retweeting, sending it out, blah 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 blah, and then I get 10 allocations of this airdrop that maybe is valuable, maybe not. If I live in an underdeveloped country, I'm finding a computer and doing that all day because
No
it's
doubt.
basically a lottery ticket that eventually would hit.
Oh yeah, I say so. I'll play that back for you on how I talk to my DAO buddies, right? Who are like, we're going to have 500 wallets vote on an allocation of $10,000. You're like, okay, well, a wallet might or might not correspond to an identity. It might be 2 wallets mean 1 guy, that kind of thing, right? And when you're dealing with 10 grand, it's 10 grand to charity. Okay. When you start going like it's $1 million and we have 1,000 users and you can't dedupe or verify, well, then money's going to get stolen. And it goes back to my original premise, going back to like the blockchain and crypto economy can only get so complex and so large until you literally have to go, you have to have 1,000 verified, like Twitter blue check mark identities attached to that. Because if not, it's going to be 1 guy somewhere goes, I've got 900 of those 1,000 wallets, and I'm going to vote $1 million to myself, and it's just going to get stolen. Right? So they're like, governance, and staking only gets you one type of governance. You literally, if you want to vote and if you want to actually like make this fair, you literally have to have a deduped identity.
And is any part of your roadmap or vision opening up your system to be used inside of other apps? So almost like the enterprise approach, where you build one, it's almost like a payment rail, like let's say Stripe or PayPal, and say you guys use it for whatever the hell you come up with, but this is what we do really well. We do digital identity really well. If you're a DeFi protocol, you want to plug into that, great. If you're a voting system and you feel like you can go out and get those customers, great, do it, but use our sort of rails.
Yes. So we've actually announced some partnerships in this realm just recently, and I would call the opening up of Everest is coming in 2 phases. First one being, we're doing partners right now like Link and Ocean and MEDAO we've announced, where they'll use us to like, hey, KYC the wallet, therefore the user, and do fiat in and out, right? By the way, Ethereum namespace too, so ENS. Now you can go like that wallet is actually attached to a deduplicated human identity, right? Sure. And you can get some certain functionality. They'll be, we're holding their hand and doing custom integration right now. We'll be opening up those APIs later in the summer, if you will, Q3, somewhere in there.
Oh man, I love that. That gets me really pumped up. Yeah.
Then so those partnerships, like let's use Ocean as an example, because I think that's the most recent one. Is it? Yeah. Okay, so let's use Ocean as an example. Understand 100% why it's good for you, why it's good for Everest, because that's adoption and it's going to be more people exposed to what you've spent your time building. Is it, and if so, how is it good for token holders?
The hesitation, I always have to be careful.
Yeah, no doubt.
So look, the Ocean community will be able to actually get real identity attached to their wallet. They can get KYC'd identity if they want to touch fiat, right? If they do that, then literally we do have the rails to do fiat in and out, and all of that helps the Ocean community. Now, along the way, that means all of those users got ID tokens. It also means that the functionality, those users will then start staking more ID tokens for more
Sure.
functionality over
Sure.
time.
Got it. Okay, so they get exposed to the network, and for them to take on, a new level of accessibility, and I'm making up these numbers, I don't know what they are. Maybe it's staking 5 or 10 or 15 or 20. It's like,
Right.
oh, I really want to use the DeFi feature. Okay, well, if you want to do that, you have to stake 3, or you know what I'm
Sure.
saying there.
That's exactly it.
So those, you talked about the agents and the way that they are paid, based on the activity of their users, that they've signed up. How are they paid? So are they paid in the ID token? Are they paid in a piece of whatever you accept your fees in?
They're paid in ID tokens, which are literally mapped to the US dollar equivalent average for that month.
Okay.
So literally it's the saying, like, if I were to give 20% commissions, which I think is what it is between an agent and a teller, you do $1,000 equivalent, if you will, your user base does. Great. You do $200 equivalent, and we literally then map that to the amount of ID tokens and give that agent $200 worth of ID tokens in that
Got it.
month.
Interesting.
Okay, understood. But it's based off of the average for that month. Because where I was going next was I read some of the information on the stablecoin that you were introducing. So maybe you can talk a little bit about that, because one of the questions I was going to have is, like, crypto is volatile, and a rather like new token as ID is going to be volatile as well. And so if I'm a agent and I'm like, look, I'm just trying to make $100, whatever form that comes in, I'm happy with. But what I'm not going to be happy with is if I work for the month and I earn $100 worth of the token, and 3 days before I receive it, something super unfortunate happens, the token price drops, and now I only receive $20. That's going to make me undermotivated to continue next month. But it sounds like the way of addressing some of that is in taking an average of what that price was over the time period. Where does the stablecoin come in?
So the stablecoin is, if you will, going back into the macro econ of it all, you always need some stable currency just for payments. Like, all economies need that, right? And that is what we call a credit token. So think of that as programmable dollars or euros, okay? But it's just stable, and that's how we're able to get local rails around the world, and it's how people, if you will, transact normally. Again, think of a dollar. The ID token is access. Its functionality is like a software license, like I said. Now, if the price goes up or down, it would be going up or down based over the long term, a bit like a bond, right? That is, the ID token will ultimately reflect the value of the economy based on the credits circulating in transactions, right? So we have 1,000 transactions, and well, that should ultimately over time be reflected in ID. If we end up with 1 million transactions, the ID will reflect that economy.
Sure.
Right?
Sure. That's a really interesting way to look at that. And I, there's so much that's being put together here, and like so much that can be done. This is going to maybe be a selfish question off of this, because I have two questions. One of them has to do with Aave talking about their permission pools, which is wild. And so I'm going to take this a little bit selfishly, if you don't mind me hijacking for a moment here, Alan.
Go for it, because I don't know what that is. So someone tell me.
Well, let's start there. So I think it was today, 5 hours ago, DeFi lending platform Aave reveals permission pools for institutions. Designed for institutional investors, a lending pool will feature KYC and AML. You are like the perfect person to be talking to on a day like today. So let's let you loose on that, Bob, if you wouldn't mind.
Sure. Ecdsa's noted in that, I think there's a Cointelegraph article.
It is Cointelegraph. Yep, that's correct.
Yeah, Ajit and I did a video together back in February, I think it was.
Nice.
Yeah, this is not surprising. This is exactly where the whole market is headed.
Mm-hmm.
And we have announced that we are working on doing the API integration for KYC, AML, and fiat onboarding into Aave's protocol. Like, there's multiple videos on that, and
Yep.
we're in the process of actually doing that API integration. Now, their permission pools, like, that's gonna be happening. The amount of traditional finance out there in the world that literally wants access to this, and keep in mind, like, they're not, if you're a regulated financial institution by FinCEN, let's say, and you want to actually dip your toes into DeFi, you have to be like, okay, KYC, AML, everything.
Yep.
It has to be, okay, it's got to be fast and cheap transactions, right? Mainnet isn't going to work on that one, right? You have to have incredible security. You have to have Uber reporting, like, go all the way through, like, all these things. Like, so Everest is very much built for a lot of that. And that transition is like, take traditional finance and go, let's assume we're going to move about $1 trillion into DeFi over the next few years, right?
Yeah.
It's going to be, use your metaphor, it's an API into the new world, or what they used to call when NAFTA came around, that giant sucking sound. Just going to go, right?
Right. Because why would you have assets in a lot of other places?
Why would you?
Yeah.
Right? And so, like, so if you remember the stack I described with Everest, like, okay, identity with KYC, with an account, by the way, corporate accounts too.
That's right.
And a ledger. Oh, and by the way, like, you can run the protocol itself on a permissioned chain, which is what we do.
So that gets me super pumped up. I actually just ran into this for the first time the other day, for the first time, where I was talking to somebody about investing in a project, talking to a fund, and I asked if they got into, all the craziness that's out there in DeFi. And the answer was literally, we can't get involved in this because of the potential ramifications of what could happen. Like, I don't know who I'm trading through on a DEX. I don't know if I send money somewhere and it ends up in a terrorist fund that came from me to, like, it's game over. So I never once thought about that. And it kind of hit me where I was like, this is a real concern for adoption. And adoption, let's be honest, I love that I adopted early, and Alan, and I'm sure you did too, Bob. We're not the ones that we need to take this to the next level, right?
Right. And to your point, like all these guys have either limited partners, some, if you will, governing system where I'm going to invest money on your behalf and I will do this. Like, who's the counterparty? And you can't answer that. Like, full stop.
Done.
Like, just stop.
Done.
Right? And so, like, that's a lot of where Everest is positioning to be, right?
Yeah. It's funny too, because there's a bit of there's a juxtaposition where I think all of us kind of romanticize the anonymity of crypto, right? Where it's nice. I like that. In fact, a lot of my personal group that I trade with on a day-to-day basis, people I've never met, probably in 20 different countries. Okay. I love that. But like, ultimately, the juxtaposition, excuse me, microphone, is going to be, we need to move towards exactly what you're talking about. But I think part of me doesn't want to, but knows it's going to get there. And I think that's obviously Alan's article and your whole premise.
Yeah. I feel like projects have to embrace it, or crypto has to embrace it. Like, and I wrote a line, I can't remember what it was, but it was like, there will always be core Bitcoiners or crypto people that will push back against that. Yeah. And it's fine. But like, the way that I view this more so now than anything else is like, how does this impact my business? And it can't be this way forever. And I don't know how it's going to change, but I do want to place bets on how it's going to change, because I'm really sure that it will. I wanted to ask about your partnership with Aave, if that's the right word for it. Can you talk to us more? How did that come about, and what does it look like today?
Sure. So before we get onto that one, like, I think it was Raoul Paul that I saw, who's like, trust me, we really want KYC. That's the only way we get to mass market.
Yep.
Right. And again, like, everyone sort of frames that usually in a black or white scenario because it's, all the what I would call crypto anarchist tribe is like, I want total anonymity. And if you will, government regulators like, no, I want to know your DNA.
Yeah.
Right. And there's a way to do this where you can go like, I think, Everest, we're trying pretty hard where you go like, I will give you a proof that I am KYC'd. You don't actually get to see my address. Right.
Absolutely.
You can do that and go like, all right, I just satisfied the regulator of like, I'm a known deduplicated, not on terrorist identity attached to this wallet. They don't get to know my DNA sample. And similarly, the crypto anarchists like, you're not anonymous, but you're pseudonymous.
Mm-hmm.
Right?
I think you have to go back to like why do you want to be anonymous? And I think when you push most people on this,
There's no real reason.
it comes down to like, well, I don't want to pay my taxes. It's like, all right, well,
that's not even it. I mean, like, but you're right. I mean, that's definitely part of it. Quite frankly, I would, in a world where I'm given a choice between being anonymous or being doxxed, I'd rather be anonymous if it doesn't restrict me from doing anything. And that's just my general feeling. I don't know why I am that way. Maybe it's because I was born in the 80s. Okay. A little bit of a boomer. I don't like all my stuff being out there. Right.
Yeah. So it makes sense until you play it out on a macro level and you go like, here's 300 million of us anonymous. You're like, okay, the economy doesn't work. It stops.
Right. Right.
Like,
Go ahead. Sorry.
If you do have to make like a good, like well-rounded argument for why you don't want to have to KYC or etc. Like if I'm one of those people that argues that point, I think one of the only things you can go to that's legitimate is saying like, well, I don't want anyone to restrict my access to this thing.
Absolutely.
And like accreditation laws, I think are crazy. And like there are things that I can do that other people can't do, or that even my friends can't do, that I think is completely unfair. And it's in my opinion a large driver of wealth inequality. And so that is a perfectly good argument of like why I feel like anyone should want to be anonymous, is because I don't want anyone to keep me from doing something. I feel competent enough that I can make my own decisions. And so I don't want you to tell me that I don't get access to that because you don't think I'm smart enough or because you don't think I can handle it. But at the same time, I feel like a large portion, at least I get this on Twitter, maybe it's like an echo chamber, is like, well, I don't want to KYC because I'm not reporting this to the IRS, or I don't want to KYC because I shouldn't be trading this product because it's not licensed for me. And I feel like that's just not gonna fly forever.
Yeah, look, I think there's enough smart people in crypto to educate the regulators to bring them around from I call 20th century thinking into like, hey, DeFi protocols are a new paradigm. We can still satisfy some of what you want, like you can do but you don't get to, like, to your point, get to know everything about me and then also be in a position to prevent me from doing stuff.
Yeah, to tell me no.
Right.
So hitting that point, if we could go back to Aave, because I think that's important. I think my question was, how did that come about, and what does it look like? And then I'll probably have some follow-ups.
Sure. So we did 2 announcements and 2 partnerships at roughly the same time. One was Aave and the other one was Kyber. They were roughly the same partnership, which is maybe the paradigm of like, I came from BitTorrent way back when, and we were literally a protocol maker. I'm a little bit like Aave and Kyber with their AMM, right? It's like, I can run this protocol on a network, and Hollywood studios in this case couldn't sue me out of existence.
Right.
Anyone, and so bringing back into DeFi, you go like, okay, Aave and Kyber, like, they want fiat on-ramps. In order to do fiat on-ramps and off-ramps, by the way, off-ramps are almost as important to them as on-ramps. Right? You need to have KYC involved. And so some of their partners, they looked at us and said like, great, you guys actually can get fiat on and off in multiple regions around the world really cost effectively. Right? And so that we announced, I believe, in February. We're now, if you will, going through the APIs of like, hey, euros, dollars, pesos, how does it work to actually like pull it in, turn it into our stable coin credit, and from our stable coin, go put it into their system, right? And then bring it back into a user's wallet, like in Aave's case, and then get Aave staked token. Yep. So we're mid-development on that. Like I said, we don't have the APIs all the way done where anyone can just plug in and go. Like, it takes a bunch of our engineers to actually hold hands and do it. So we're going through that. The way it came about, I think I just reached out to Stani. I was like, dude, like I can get you on and off ramps, in places you can't get to right now. And I think that tickled his fancy.
Yes.
And is that interaction with Aave like have any sort of exclusivity to it, or theoretically could anyone build in similar?
Everybody is open to go do whatever they want with whomever they want.
Nice.
Truly spirit like, and it's like, but we're big boys. If we can't compete, we don't belong there. But what it looks like right now, and I'll give you a sense. Like, I'm looking at the U.S. market, and one of the leaders in fiat on and off ramps, well, they need MSB licenses, and they have like 30 or 35 MSB licenses in each state. We just walked in and went like, our credit token and the way we architected it looks like basically a gift card. And so we get all 50 states as soon as we turn on basically a merchant account.
Ooh.
So we get it, if you will, all in one boat from a license we have in Europe, and will be more cost effective. So it's like, when you tell that story to DeFi guys, like all the heads nod in the right direction.
Yeah, absolutely. Do it smarter, do it better. I love the free market idealism where it's like, hey, you gotta compete. You're doing something that simplifies a task they've been trying to solve for a while, right? Yeah. And that's a good thing.
Yeah, and look, they can't touch it themselves, right? If you're in a protocol company, you can't get near the regulated financial piece. You got to be a software company.
Yeah. Yeah, the other thing, and this is me going a little bit off, but I have like 3 questions for you, and I know Alan has a bunch too, but like, one is I think about biometrics and I think about security and crypto. And a lot of times when I talk to people that are in not third world or developing nations, but where we are now, security is a big concern, right? Seed phrase, getting hacked, whatever it may be, it happens a lot. And to me, as someone who doesn't care about whether my information is out there because I trust that you're doing what you say you're going to do, I want to be able to do this for my own security. Like, I have a decent amount of my net worth in crypto. I want to onboard to give myself that, like, you may find my passphrase, you don't have my thumbprint, or you need multiple whatevers to get there. Like, that's a pretty big deal in a different type of use case. I don't know. Can you talk about that a little bit?
Yeah, I mean, look, the lore and legends of people losing, how many Bitcoin because they lost their seed phrase is just, makes the hair on your neck stand up, right?
Yeah.
And so one of the things that gets often overlooked as we talk about Everest is like, how about you just don't need a seed phrase? You don't have a private key to lose. Your live biometrics effectively act like your seed phrase or your private, right? So it's, by the way, it's not just your live biometrics. You have to have a PIN too. So it's a what you know and who you are, etc.
You get a multi-sig too, I guess, theoretically on that, right? Family, multi-sig, multiple biometrics, whatever.
Yep. And so look, I don't know how geeky you want to get into like MPC in terms of architecture. Like what we just described there is, like I said, like Everest itself can't open people's wallets and data stores because we don't have people's live biometrics and their PIN. And so I can say like the regulators' heads exploded when we were like, you think we're an intermediary and like, who's the custodian? Who has the private key? And I was like, well, we put keys together for the user, but we actually can't do that until the user shows up with their live biometrics and their PIN at the same time.
Right.
And they were like, okay. And it was like form over function.
Sure.
And so, anyway, it's very secure, obviously, when you're doing an MPC type architecture that's reliant on live biometrics. But it also makes it easier.
Yeah, it makes a lot of sense. And that's kind of where so there's a question in the chat that I want to ask because I feel like it's relevant and probably something a lot of people are asking. What happens if you're in an accident, the biometrics no longer work? How good is biometrics these days? Et cetera, et cetera. You want to talk to that real quick?
Sure. So historically we had 2 biometrics. So it was literally face and we used another piece biometrics, we found that there was too much friction in literally onboarding and getting to stuff. We'll probably add a second biometric back. What that means is if my face gets mangled in an accident, and this has actually happened in India,
Sure.
and you go back to like a handprint,
Yeah.
for example. Like, so that's one thing we'll probably add back in later this year.
Yeah, like a secondary or tertiary, which is never used if the other one's there, but it can be in different situations.
Exactly.
Sure. Yeah.
The other piece we're architecting, we have not implemented yet. It will be social recovery.
Okay.
Right? So it's like, okay, great. Like, I'm going to have my brother, my best friend, and somebody else I trust, etc. They can come together in the case and put the keys back together.
Consensus agreement, get you past it. I love it. No, that's really, really smart. And Alan, I know you have more stuff to get to. I want to talk future sense with Bob eventually. So my point of that is you are seeing this at a level where most of us aren't, because you're dealing with different countries, and that absolutely trips me out, and like different areas that are trying to onboard. And so that takes me down a macro path, but I don't want to hijack the conversation here. So, so Alan, I not to jump in, what do you got still staying on this similar track right now?
Yeah, I as an operator like wonder, how do you even get into working with a country? I have some experience like consulting for an NGO, and that was like mind blowing to me. So can you talk about maybe pick out one of the countries that you work with and just tell us the story? How did that start?
That'd be great. Yeah.
Sure. So go back to the Indonesian case study, which is maybe all like on our website. People can read what we did, etc. Sure. We worked with, and this was literally like the government of Indonesia way back in, I think it was 2018, literally invited us over. And it was because Aya, who's on my board, and said, hey, you're into emerging markets. The government of Indonesia is doing a symposium on blockchain. I think you should go show them what you have. So that was cool. Like, so we showed them what we had, and that led to another conversation with the Office of the Vice Presidency. The Office of the Vice Presidency of Indonesia, it turns out, has a little bit of what I would call digital innovation for poverty reduction. And they were like, you know what we really want to figure out how to do? We want to give a basic savings account, BSA, to 89 million people. Right? And we were just one of those like stunning things. And they're like, we have some constraints, right? It's Indonesia. It's like islands everywhere. You don't always have bandwidth. You have people that not everybody has $100 smartphone.
Sure.
That's the biggest smartphone I've ever seen in my entire life.
Perspective. I don't know. Yeah, mine looks large.
You gotta hold it out like that.
It has 12 cameras on it. That's the biggest camera I've ever seen.
Yeah. But yeah, like, so there's some design constraints on something like that. And private keys can't be stored on a device. People don't have devices, like all this stuff. And they're like, you are probably the ideal candidate to actually go out and do a test in the field. And test in the field in Indonesia scale is 3 cities. They call them villages, but like it's a pretty populous place. So there's 6,000 families.
Okay.
Right. And so, I mean, it was, I was in Indonesia probably about every 6 weeks for 18 months.
Wow.
Working with Bank of Indonesia, which is their central bank, BRI, and BRI is actually the biggest bank there. And they're actually probably they led most of this.
Okay.
Right? So the government goes to a bank and says, hey, we want you to distribute this subsidy for us. And we want it to be cheap, fast, totally trackable, et cetera, right? And so the government said, why don't you work with BRI to actually implement this? So we had to integrate with BRI, right? That is like a corporate account for us, right? And then just to walk you through what happens, like we then had all the BRI agents go to all the families in the villages, register everybody. Then when we got to distribution of the energy subsidy, it was send out our credit token. And the credit token was programmed to only be used, it could only be redeemed for a gas tank. Gas tank you like take home and cook with.
Sure.
Okay?
Like propane.
Propane, yeah, LPG. So we did the distribution. Literally people they didn't even know they had it because they literally had a crypto account attached to their face.
Right.
Like, So then, the day after we hit send, like BRI agents were walking around the village going like, scan. Oh, hey, it's you. Here's what you have in your account. Do you want to give me, the agent, BRI bank agent, your voucher, your credit token, right?
Yeah.
So we did that. Like then they handed over. And then at the end of the day, the agent was like, hey, I got 100 of these. I now want to get my commission. So we literally were redeeming over our Everchain ledger all these vouchers and then going, okay, trigger the payments in rupiah, so fiat, down to all the agents' balance. So
was that going in their Everest wallet?
it was actually going into their BRI wallet. Their rupiah was.
Okay,
now,
gotcha.
The Ever wallet was actually, that's had the credit tokens and the ID tokens.
Yep. And so I'm curious, where is revenue generated for Everest? So like outside of just what you want to accomplish, the tech side of things, how is Everest a business? Where does your revenue come from?
Sure. We look like, a financial institution that, if you'll, takes a very small percentage of the transaction. So every good example is like remittances, right? The average remittance right now is like between 7 and 8%, right? And think of Western Union. We can do it for 2 to 3%, for example, which is the World Bank goal, by the way. By the way, we can also do it, and I'll just give you a flow. Dollars into credits, our stable coin. Put it into USDT, right? Because we can. Then USDT into, let's say, the Philippines or Mexico, where we have crypto accounts. Convert it back into USDT into pesos, and then from pesos down into somebody's bank account or into a network. We can do all of that in about 3 minutes and do it for 2%. And still, if you will, be lower cost than everybody, faster.
Yeah.
They'll earn decent revenue.
Got it. So that requires a couple of things. That would require a user base, and that would also require assets flowing, whether it's new fiat in or fiat that's on the platform doing something, lending, being sent, being received. So what metrics as a business are you looking at, like in a monthly reporting? What are those top level numbers that you're like, I need to see X, Y, and Z?
That's a great question. We literally prioritize number of users and revenue, right? So revenue per user too, right? So like I mentioned, we have about 5 services we can offer. So think of remittance, buy, sell crypto, right? Swap, right? We're doing swapping. Simply doing USD type accounts,
right?
Simple payments, all of those, and go back into, again, a little bit of the macro, like how are we going to compete with Western Union if they drop their prices? Great, we're going to give away remittances for 6 months maybe, because we've got 4 other services we can offer.
Sure.
Right? And so going back into like, how do I measure? We go, how many users do we have doing what transaction volume over what period of time? And just to juxtapose that, how do we then think about our own business? Well, we look at partners who can bring on the most users doing the most transactions.
Right.
So those metrics, as much as you're like willing to share, how many users do you have today?
We probably shouldn't get too much into that. I can tell you what we've done historically.
Sure.
Which
percentage year over year, maybe?
What's that?
So you do percentages year over year, just growth or something like that?
Yeah. I'd say like we basically did a 2x to 3x from 18, 19, and 20.
Wow.
So like, but we were starting pretty low too.
Yeah,
so like,
well, yeah.
But yeah. To be fair, like, it's what the VCs like to see. They're like, great, show me your users' revenue and margin are expanding. Right?
Yeah.
Like, I remember going public on the NASDAQ. They're like, show me double of revenue and double of margin. Like, that's a no-brainer. That's a business that wins.
Yeah.
So can't get into the specifics of the numbers, but take your number where you are today. Where do you expect to be by the end of 2021?
I would expect again to be probably a 3x of what we did in 2020, if not more. And I'll tell you why. So what I described to you that we've built and done so far has been what I would call a lot of infrastructure building. So we've collected a bunch of revenue to, let's go do this with the Indonesians. Let's go digitize a bank, which is another thing we're doing right now. That's a lot of setup fees. And really what it does is it means we can build the platform. Now, over the last 6 months, what we've done is we've been taking those Lego pieces I just described and building it for what I call a direct-to-consumer play. We haven't been doing that of yet. And so our direct-to-consumer, I expect to do very well, actually. Going back to the ecosystem development funds, like, okay, do we need to rely on governments or banks as channel to bring those users in? Or can we just go, here it is, download, get your wallet, and start sending money and value to each other all over the world? And so that's something we haven't had in the past, and I expect that will do very well.
I agree.
And by the way, just to be somewhat specific about it, when you see negative interest rates in Europe and nearly zero in the US, we might not see the growth in emerging markets. We might be like, I'm John in Nebraska, or I'm Paolo in Rome, and I'm tired of the banks charging me interest. I literally want to take part of my paycheck and immediately 2-click go into yield.
Absolutely. Absolutely. I mean, that's like we talked about a little bit ago, where I think Alan said it best. It doesn't make sense to be anywhere else at this point. Like the case is being made to start avoiding those systems, which is obviously an existential crisis for those centralized services that you just talked about.
Oh yeah. I mean, like anyone who, doesn't believe this now, it's like, did you see what Google and the internet did to the traditional media companies?
Right.
Like they used to, like newspapers used to be a thing, right?
Yeah. I mean, this is that for financial institutions, but it's flattening the world. I mean, that's like,
absolutely.
That's what I mean. It gives me chills when I think about it, because it's like, this changed for me, and I know you alluded to the fact that you have children. I'm sure that's not a secret to anybody, but when I had my son, my world perspective changed completely on this stuff. And like, I see things on TV about families that are just trying to grind and work hard and raise their kids, and their inability to get access to these things, and it makes me angry, and it makes me want to do something. So I see stuff like this, and maybe being a father does it, but like that really hits me in the feels. Like that's, yeah.
Yeah, no, look, this world's gonna happen.
Mm-hmm.
It's as sure as the sun sets in the west, like this happens, right? Everest is positioned well to actually capitalize on that.
Sure.
And there are lots of others, like you said, the DeFi protocol guys are in a great position as well.
Yeah, no doubt.
Can you purchase ID directly from the wallet, like in app?
Yes, I believe you can. If not today, we integrated Uniswap into our user experience. I believe we didn't actually show the exchange rate in the slippage API call yet.
One of the things I think is so important is that you talked about being like layer 2 on Ethereum, and I assume that you have to do that because otherwise, especially I would imagine I'm all over the place here. If you focus on developing nations, the average account size per user is going to be small, and like that's okay. For some period of time, that's fine. So assuming that, you really can't transact on layer 1 because the fees would literally be higher than the balance. And so what I'm wondering is, okay, so I sign up as a user. An agent comes and reads my biometrics. I now have an account. I receive one ID, so I receive access to the basic features. Yep. Now I want to level up, so I need 2, 3, 4, 5. Maybe you can. What is the next level?
5.
Actually. 5. Okay, so I'll use 5. So I now want 5 tokens because I want access to what's one of the features in level 2.
Think of it. Here's my remittance club, right?
Okay. So I want 5. I need to acquire those 5.
Yep.
The experience can't be, okay, here's Uniswap. It's like, well, wait, what? I just got my propane tank. What is Uniswap?
Right.
Walk me through that experience and what happens there.
So there's a couple of different ways. One, we did announce, I think it was Monday, the token will be listed on Bitfinex.
I saw that.
Right. So there's going to be multiple centralized exchanges that actually give access that aren't charging $300 swap fees, right?
Okay, but in that example, I just got my propane tank and I'm headed back to finish up the chicken, and it's like someone tells me I can buy the other 4 on Bitfinex.
Right. Yeah.
So
I hear you. Because they're like, hear me out on this.
Yeah.
That's one avenue, and that's probably the easiest way if you're Italian and European and
Right.
Yep, I agree. Bitfinex is a great option.
Right. Wow, what a back end and a platform and a team. Like, they're really quite good. The other way, clearly, is we are actually in the process of, if you will, bringing, for example, an AMM like Uniswap onto Everchain itself.
Okay.
So that you can actually swap and trade
on layer 2.
On late.
Well, is that considered layer 2?
It's considered layer 2 today.
Okay.
Now, think of, that's one bridge to Ethereum. Now, walk with me here of bridge to Solana, bridge to BSC, and we're still going to run protocols on our chain.
Okay.
So that means, and then towards the end of this year, we'll be opening our chain up so that it really is more like a layer 1 that can then bridge to everybody else. So go ahead.
And once that piece is there, I assume, would that allow you to then offer, because you talked about your fiat on ramp, that being important, would that, once you have that ability on your chain, then you could onboard the fiat, transact on Everchain, and settle for like low fees, I assume?
Yes. By the way, that's Q4. What you just described we'll have later this summer, which is fiat in.
Yep.
You then we are literally putting a Uniswap type AMM on our chain. So 5-second transactions for a fraction of a penny.
Yep.
And you'll be able to swap, hey, here's pesos, dollars, euro into ID tokens. And you'll be able to do it fast, cheap, and it won't be like a $300 swap fee.
And where's that liquidity sourced from?
That's a great question. So we'll be, if you're pointing to liquidity pools on Ethereum mainnet this summer. Now, as you just circle back to Aave and their permissioned chain, we think that the attractiveness of what we're offering will bring some liquidity pools over.
Yeah.
Okay. But by the way, that's a really good question. Right now, like I talked to my own guys, or better said, if you look at all the DeFi guys, like everything there, all of V3 and everything else is coming out, it's all directed at the liquidity pools. Because if you can get the liquidity pools over, you've got a heck of a market. So.
And I could be wrong here, so tell me if you think I'm thinking about this the wrong way, but couldn't you pull in, so you talked about the bridges to the different options. You brought up Solana, you brought up Binance Smart Chain. So let's say like Solana, then you could have a Serum integration where you don't have to source that liquidity. The liquidity is someone else's problem. You're strictly plugging in there. Right. Is that possible for you? Or would that be possible for you?
Yeah, so we'll probably, in this summer, you'll see that on the Ethereum, our implementation with Ethereum this summer. So that is, all the liquidity pools are still attached to, let's say, Uni or Kyber or Bancor, right? Those kind of things. Sure. We can still draw off those liquidity pools, even though we run the protocol itself on our chain. It's fast and cheap.
Nice.
Okay.
Nice.
Makes sense. Answers my question, because I think the hardest part when I think about like the projects that are going after the underdeveloped market is the rails that exist today for crypto are already in a lot of ways breaking, like especially like Ethereum. And maybe that will be fixed, maybe it won't, but it probably won't be fixed fast enough for you to move at the pace that you want to. And so I think it's a question of, well, okay, how do I get people access to what I want to get them access to when it costs $150 to do so or $120 to do so? It's not feasible. It's barely feasible for me, and I hate doing it. How is it going to be feasible for somebody that's literally just picked up their propane tank? So it sounds like you've thought through that.
Yeah, I mean, I'll go back literally 3.5 years in Singapore with Virgil, did proof of stake, co-authored it, and Vitalik, and I literally was just lucky enough. I was like, okay, guys, like, how fast can you do? And I gave them the Indian economy. I was like, they're doing Just to give you a sense, India's economy, which is real economy, 500 million identity verifications a month is what it was when they did the transition, and yet needed that for a SIM card. And then it settled into like 120 million just ID verifications per month. Then 8x that for financial transactions, just a transaction. No, so like, just do that, and like there's 1 billion transactions, by the way, fraction of a penny in under 3-5 seconds. Like, when do you guys think you can get to that? Because that's literally like, you have to do that for human beings. If not, like,
you're only taking India, right? How about the rest of the world?
I was like, just when you get there, and they were like, oh boy, like that's a long, long way away. Like that's sharding with this, and it's 5 years, maybe 7 years done. And it was like, okay, well, great. Like that tells me like Everchain has to be a thing. It has to perform at this level of performance, right? Because the permissionless layer 1 guys aren't there yet, right?
Got it.
Right.
So that's literally, we designed this for exactly this scenario.
That's
Go ahead,
so Joe. I don't know who Joe Guard 1990 is, but he's brought up like 1,000 things that are really interesting that I want to go back to, because you just kind of touched on a few of them. I think he's somebody that either knows you or knows the project very well. But he talked about something that kind of goes hand in hand with identity and insurance, and it was a partnership with Realm Insurance, which I feel like kind of goes hand in hand with what we're talking about right now, and asked you about the implications and the benefits of insurance. Because, by the way, before I was in this, I've been in commercial insurance, so I have a feel on commercial and life and health, which this all kind of gets my mind flowing there. But let's take a step back. I don't know what Realm Insurance is, so maybe you can talk about that, and then we can go to that point. Yeah.
Sure. Realm is one of the biggest unknown secrets in crypto insurance.
Okay.
It's part of the Dell Tech Group, which is a Bahamian bank with over 10 billion under management. They're huge, right? That's a big thing.
Yeah.
Realm actually does do insurance for crypto projects and companies. In order to get our special license that I have here on the wall, insurance is required, right? So think of like when an exchange, I don't know if you guys remember, like, BitGo would be like, I got insurance because I power exchanges. Well,
Sure.
We had to get insurance because we're a custodian of people's money and crypto, right? And so simply getting insurance in the crypto world is a normally newsworthy thing, right? Like, it's hard to get. You got to show up with bulletproof security, show all the policies, et cetera, et cetera. So in this case, we literally partnered with them to make sure that we had insurance so that when we take users' funds on board and process transactions for them, we are insured as an institution.
Interesting. Very, very good. Very good answer, and something that obviously you think you have those things covered, but I mean, you can back it up. But very, very cool. And this other question by Joe kind of goes to this onboarding part. I'm going to read it because it's a little bit long. Banks, governments, NGOs, et cetera, need to stake 100,000 plus ID to get access to the full features. My question is, how do we reach out to them and market it and get them to take part? Are people internally at Everest having these convos with these organizations, and how do we push the adoption? We've kind of talked about that, but I just wanted to run it because it's a good question, and I feel like you can put a bow on it a little bit.
Sure. It's, how much enterprise sales individuals do you need to actually reach out to these organizations and go through that, what I would call it, elongated sales cycle?
Yeah.
What we found over the years is banks and financial institutions are easier to actually get to move faster than, if you will, governments and NGOs. They really are.
I think anyone's faster than governments. You're probably right. Because I come from enterprise sales. That's what I did before crypto. And when you said, I think banks are faster, I was like, what are you going to compare this to?
I literally was having the same thing.
Now, to be fair, like we're talking with a nation right now that literally has a king and actually cares about his people. Like, okay, that's a faster decision than a bureaucracy.
Yeah.
But by the way, all of this sort of leads to a little bit of going back to like, why did we do a direct to consumer or a thing that can be white labeled by institutions that effectively is B to B to C. This is why, because it's literally like how fast can we get the most users on board doing the most transactions?
Sure.
And so to build a whole end-to-end, we're like, here's a direct to consumer, but by the way, if you're a bank, just put your logo on it and go to market.
Nice.
It's way faster than, if you will, some of what Joe just suggested.
Yeah. Yeah, white labeling. I love it. No, that's really good stuff. Really, really good stuff. C. Fibbery has asked a few questions, and I'm sorry I didn't read them, but I think this is a pretty good one. He said, creating a sidechain is far from trivial. There are entire projects like Polygon focused on just that. How is Everchain achieving a high level of performance while maintaining a high level of security and decentralization?
We forked one of basically what BSC did. They forked the proof of authority chain from Ethereum. So that was a quick answer. We are not doing the level of permissionlessness, that is, so decentralization with nodes yet. So what we do is we literally made it super secure, fast, and cheap, but it's permissioned. Like, we do that. Now,
Gotcha.
The way we actually make this what I would call okay with the world is we actually will run the transactions fast, cheap, and then we'll batch them and do what I think they're calling different versions, different nomenclature for L2, but like this is like a ZK rollup. We'll do 1,000 transactions and then post a digest out to mainnet. So
Gotcha.
That's one thing out there, and you go like, are these contracts, if you will, Turing complete? Right? Is the Solidity contract still valid?
Right.
Right. And then people can go like, okay, that's publicly available to view for anybody. And you get to know that you don't get to see what's inside, but you get to know that the contract was completed successfully, etc.
Sure.
You don't get to do, if you'll geek out with me for a second, like Plasma's first implementation 2 years ago was, hey, let's go ahead and do on chain on L1 and do like 2 cycles to block ceiling, but that way people can pull back what happened if somebody's being a bad actor.
Sure.
Right. And I was like, okay, well, that's a good theory. And it turns out, like, guess what? No one talks about Plasma anymore because it's just too hard. Right. And so people are doing like side chains. And
right.
So, when everyone's like, oh, it's a ZK rollup, you're like, I've been doing that for like 2 years. What are you talking about?
Right.
Anyway.
That's where you lose me. That's where it's all over the top of my head. So I'm glad that there are people like you out there that understand the technology behind it, because you're able to do such cool things. And then, where I feel like I can provide some value is like, all right, now how do we actually get this in front of people? And so I really appreciate your time and coming on and answering our questions. We've asked you a million of them. With the last few minutes before we wrap up, I wanted to ask if you have any questions for us. If not, it's totally fine, but give you the opportunity, because it definitely can't just be a one-way street,
Yeah. Sure. Well, let me, if you will, give you an idea more than anything. Okay. I've been looking at crypto since literally we were at BitTorrent, and we were talking about doing like, hey, let's go ahead and do decentralized storage and incentivize people. Like, this is 2012 kind of thing. And what we saw was sort of first generation Bitcoins, like in, out, permissionless. And by the way, it's a thing of beauty. Like, it's going to change the whole world, and kind of already has. But it's just in, out. Right. And then smart contracts came along, but they came from that heritage. If that statements of doing like, hey, we can now do escrow accounts and all sorts of contracts, literally like in the legal sense, you can do that. But that still missed one of the core pieces. So if you will, Gen 1, Bitcoin, Gen 2, Ethereum, and everyone's still talking lingua franca of wallets and if-then statements. The next gen, whether it's Everest or not, will have identity attached to that. Some level of human unique, can be somewhat anonymous, but you're gonna have to have some level of identity attached to that, to, I would call it a third generation. That's the only way we get to mass market. And so every once in a while, my own team gets into like sort of the weeds of like what's going on this week. And it's like, guys, like, you gotta understand, like, this is a tectonic shift. And we've gone from, it's taken a decade, right? Like, here it comes, Gen 1, Gen 2, and all the little variations in between. Gen 3 is coming. And that's where Everest is positioned, where you can do permissionless network with if-then statements that is doing fiat to crypto, et cetera, and all attached with some identity, because if you don't do identity, you can't have a real economy.
Right.
That's, just to give you a sense as to how we think about it and the long-term.
Absolutely.
That's
but so I want to be respectful of your time, but I want to jump in and ask this because you're making like all these bells ringing in my head from a macro perspective, because you're right. It's where the ball's going, not where the ball is. And what does that look like? And that's kind of how we started the conversation. On building an economy, it starts with identification and building, from the base layer up, which is very, very interesting to me. Have you been on Real Vision yet with Rao or no? Rao Paul?
No, I haven't.
Really? Oh my God. You have to be on there. I love Real Vision. I have no problem plugging it. It's free. Real Vision crypto is free. You need to get on there. I'm going to do what I can to make that happen. But it's the best thinkers in the world. And like you should be on there. So we should rally our audience to do that, talk about this, because that's where it makes sense. But so you already just kind of like teed me up for the question I wanted to ask you to begin with. And that's about where the ball's going. So I hopefully we can end on this. There's a few more questions in the chat, which we'll try to get to, but you're seeing this from governmental, from financial institutions. You probably have a better view of this than 99% of people, just the nature of what you're doing. Where do you see the ball going in 5-10 years? If you had to, I got to nail down a statement on what it looks like. What does it look like?
Going to be user centricity, right? That is, a lot of what I just described is literally finance based. This is one vertical, if you will. But when you give people automated self-executing contracts with a digital identity and an account, you can do things differently. Yeah. People will organize themselves, be like, the idea of a company? Well, no, it's like three of us are going to go out and do an initiative. And by the way, we can be on different sides of the planet.
Right.
Not know each other well, but we're going to go like, here's a pool of things, and we're going to literally, I'm a new entity. I'm at least provable, right? Yeah. And I think we're going to see, then you're going to have voting, and then you're going to have supply chain, but it all comes back to the user being able to control, if you will, all of those interactions and be able to organize themselves.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I seriously, I'm getting pumped up thinking about it. It's taking the shackles off of innovation that are hamstringing, people around the world who have incredible ideas, but not the means to do it. This is flat. Like Thomas Friedman is going to write a book about it.
Look, every centralized database with a gatekeeper and control right now should not be sleeping at night, right?
Yeah,
because this is coming. Like,
I love it.
I can give you a sense like Jack when he talks about like, I want to do decentralized Twitter. Like, guess where that starts? It starts with identity.
100%.
Right? Like, once you do that, then you can actually start doing things like decentralized Twitter.
Oh my gosh. So we have like 1,000 questions in the chat. I want to be respectful of your time. I know that we got started late, and that's my fault. Alan, I know you got family, kids, all that kind of stuff too. Do we want to try to grab
you? Yeah, 6 p.m. hard stop.
You do? Okay. All right. Yeah. So I understand that. If you'd be up for it, Bob, I'm going to put these questions that we got. I think are pretty good, and maybe just shoot them out to you, and then we can like tweet them out and say, here's the answers that Bob came up with. Is that okay?
That sounds awesome. Thank you.
All right, very, very cool. And I'm going to go ahead and put you on the spot a little bit further here. Would you be willing to come back and talk with us in a few months, give us an update?
Absolutely. I'd welcome the opportunity.
Great. This has been an absolute blast for me. This is why I love crypto and why I think all of us kind of do not necessarily what it is, although there's a lot of great things about where we are now, but certainly where we can be, and you're helping facilitate that. So thank you for what you're doing. Hopefully we all learned a lot here. Alan, and I appreciate you kind of driving this as well. So gentlemen, it's been an absolute pleasure.
My pleasure, guys. Thank you for the time.
All right, take care. Thanks for the great questions, and keep an eye out for those answers. We'll retweet them out on Stacked, on Alan, and probably Bob will too. So keep an eye on that. Everybody have a great night.
Thanks, guys.
Take care. Bye-bye.